Hey T-Heads, this is Don and Adrian. We're back for another impromptu training session. You liked the last video that much. So many comments. Did you see that?
I've seen that.
I love the format. So we're like, hey, we're onto something. We stumbled onto something. And so he's back to ask me questions which I may or may not have any answers to.
That is true. I'm hoping to have some questions that will
So last time when you started the video, you
said,
said, I hope you're going to be able to answer my questions. Now you've already turned.
I've turned.
Now he's already turned, hoping to stump me.
The way people turn on you.
The way that people change. You've changed, Adrian. We're going to be drinking this, a classic. Come on, focus, son.
Oh, that's the privilege. The privilege, guys. This here is like one of the first Pu-Erhs that Maillard sold. And I remember we had this, me and Alex had this back in before Maillard was even branded. Like it was still Channel Up and we were drinking this. So
this is 2016. Lao Banjiang, 600-year-old Gushu. Super epic.
Super epic.
Look at the color on that now. Come on.
Oh my god, it transformed into like sort of
caramel goodness.
Caramel yellowish.
Yellowy brown caramel.
That's
goodness.
Crazy.
And the reason why we are drinking this,
it's coppery, like literally like it's copper. Wow.
And the reason why we're drinking this is because Adrian has told me that he wants to talk about aging. So I thought, well, let's pull out an aged tea. And this one took my fancy. I think this is my only cake of this. So this is seriously like precious.
Fully appreciating this moment.
Yeah, well, let's see. Hopefully it tastes good. Hopefully it tastes good. Anyway, all right. So last video was 45 minutes, probably a bit too long. So let's try to dive in as quickly as possible. I'm already losing leaves here.
Right.
Go for it. What questions? Well, what's the subject today, and what questions do you have?
So the subject for today, I was thinking to be aging tea. We get this question a lot. How should I age my teas? What teas are suitable for aging? Even though we touched about it in the last episode, I don't think we actually discussed anything about how to age and what are some techniques that people that do not have space, do not have proper conditions to age tea, because aging tea is an art form, right? It's not gonna be as simple and accessible to everybody. But saying that, I feel like there's also ways around it. And in the last 10 years, I've been struggling and I've been working with aging my own teas. And I think we had some at the last live me and you did together, and they turned out that they had like a specific bell pepper taste to them.
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember you had your
bell pepper Romania.
Eastern Europe peppers. The peppers came out. Yeah, so I remember.
Since then, I just like it started in my mind. I was like, oh my god, I need to do something about these teas, because having them in clay and just in your house is not enough. So there needs to be something else. You need to like know your environment firstly. This is what I think, and this is why I say to people, know your environment. Are you in a dry environment? Are you in a wet environment? Don't just assume. Like I've assumed that Romania was a very dry place, a wet place, because of like the cold winters, long winters. But actually it wasn't. Like the tea was very dry. I remember it was very dry. So I'm like, okay, what to do next? So my questions now are...
It's a big intro. What's the question?
Big intro. Questions are, how, what is... the big question is, what is the best way to store each individual teas? And I'll tell you how I store some of my teas, and then
stop.
come in.
I think that before we go there, we should go into trying to understand what is aging. Because there's no point talking about storage conditions until we understand why, what we're trying to achieve, right?
Right. It makes sense. It makes sense. We're trying to achieve this.
It smells really good. Very nutty, very caramelized.
Sweet.
So I think that it's an important subject, and I think that you're right in bringing it up, because I don't think that we've got a video that really just sort of tries to nail this down, and that's partly intentional because ultimately there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of unknowns in tea, but there's a lot of unknowns in aging as well. And so, all that we can do is make our best attempt to explain what we know, but also be transparent about what we don't know. And that allows us to do more experimentation, right, as a community, which is why I'm very keen on everyone just feeding back their own storage conditions and what works for them, etc. But of course, there's subjectivity involved as well. So it's never going to be an exact science or art.
So I know
Oh my gosh.
in aging tea, there's 3 factors. The third one I recently learned from you, but I know about the 2 factors, which is humidity and oxygen,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
Humidity, oxygen, and temperature, sorry. So there's
Okay.
temperature has to
All
play
right.
a role. So
But I still think we need to go back. Let's just go back
All right.
to what's happening.
What's happening when tea ages.
Yeah, when tea ages, because I think that's fundamentally that's the first point here. So we're all aging.
Right.
You're aging. I'm aging. We're all aging, and the aging process is a browning process, right?
Right.
It's a process of generally a combination of different things. Oxidation being one of them. Oxidation is the redox reaction where the molecules are giving up an oxygen, an electron, right? So I'm not, a chemist, but I know enough about that. So there's oxidation, right? That oxidation is normally sped up by enzymes. So it's called enzymatic oxidation, right? And the reason why you heat the tea leaves is to try to deactivate those enzymes so that you slow down the oxidation process. So there's enzymatic oxidation, which is essentially degradation. You're degrading things, right? But through that degradation, you're creating things as well. You're creating new molecules. Things are breaking down into parts that have volatile aromatics, etc., etc. So there's oxidation, right? Then you've got non-enzymatic oxidation or degradation. That can happen from sunlight, it can come from heat, it can come from other forms that's not just about the air, but is about just a degradation.
Other forms that are opposing. Okay.
So you've got oxidation, and we'll throw them under enzymatic and non-enzymatic. But for the most part, when we're talking about aging with tea, we're talking about enzymatic oxidation for the most part.
So oxygen and temperature.
Wait, hold on. Forget about the factors. Forget about those factors for a second. Right.
I'm trying to simplify.
No, I'm going to try and simplify. So you've got oxidation, then you've got fermentation.
Right.
Okay. So fermentation, it happens in the presence of microbes, fungi or bacteria. So you need to have microbes in order to bring about fermentation. And the traditional way of thinking about fermentation is take something that has carbohydrates in it, like sugars, add in yeasts or bacteria,
Right.
put it in a low oxygen environment, because the reason is because if you give oxygen, then the oxygen tends to trump, a word that has changed meaning recently, but it tends to overtake priority, right? If you've got oxygen, then energy is created with oxygen. But if you take the oxygen away, then these cells have to shift and they have to change. They go, okay, we're going to have to go into fermentation mode. And so what they're doing, that's the rinse, what they're doing is taking the sugars and carbohydrates, right? And they're burning them and turning them into acids and alcohols. Okay?
Right. It's kind of like making your own alcohol. You put sugar over fruit.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
However, fruits have a lot of sugar. Teas do not have a lot of sugar. And so the fermentation process for teas is much slower, right? And it's the microbes are having to break down what little sugar is in there, because it's about 0.5% sugar or 0.2%.
Right.
It's trace. But they've also got polyphenols and fibers and things like that. So they can just slowly break them down and get some sugars, and they're trying to break down other elements of the plant. And so you have fermentation, but it is much slower than it would be with fruits or anything with high sugar content. So you've got oxidation, you've got fermentation, right? Next, Go on.
So the fermentation happens just with the natural moisture that exists in the tea, or is it added? Can you add it? Can you not add it? Because like what we say when we say keep a humidity level.
Yeah, you're still talking about conditions. I'm talking about processes first, then I'll get on to conditions.
Okay.
Right. So you got oxidation, you got fermentation. The next one is caramelization.
Right. This is the one that I didn't know about.
So caramelization is also known as the Maillard reaction, although I think that there's slight difference between the caramelization in caramelization versus Maillard reaction. But the Maillard reaction is a form of browning, let's call it that, which produces sweetness and produces, a more caramelled, nutty kind of quality, right? And the Maillard reaction, traditionally, people think of it as happening at high temperature, right? Because like if you sear a steak or something, that browning that happens, right? But the truth is that the Maillard reaction can happen at room temperature, but again, it just takes a long time, right? So you're getting oxidation, you're getting fermentation, you're getting Maillard reaction, caramelization or Maillard reaction. Those are three processes that definitely happen during the aging process. However, there are probably other processes, and this is where the unknowns come in. There are probably other processes where literally just with enough humidity, the chemical compounds that are in the leaf are still reacting with each other slightly, and there's some other intermingling and reactions. When you take the leaf and you pick it and you wither it, or you roll it and you're breaking down all of these cell walls and the constituents of the leaf are mixing up with each other, like the glycosides and all these things that are in the cells, and they're mixing with enzymes and they're doing all this stuff. They're creating all these reactions, right? They're creating all these chemical reactions. Now a lot of it is an oxidation reaction, but I think that there are other reactions that are happening that are not necessarily thrown under the heading of oxidation. So I see it as this: oxidation, fermentation, Maillard reaction, and some level of chemical interactions between the leaves. Those four those four factors, I think, are the main factors which contribute to aging tea.
Right. Okay. Now I'm I'm at your level now, understanding why. So we are just talking about like these are the processes.
Yeah.
Right? This is
now
what
we
happened.
talk about the storage
I went into
conditions.
the storage condition first.
Yeah.
So this is happening, right?
Oh.
This is happening with tea, which is okay. These processes. I'm quite curious more about that Maillard reaction, like the caramelization process. It's so these four happen with all tea, or will some teas
This four will happen with you.
So this happens.
You're
with
fermenting and oxidizing, and you're caramelizing. This happens.
Organic matter.
It's just
any organic matter. This happens.
Aging.
Okay, this is it. Okay, great.
It's like rusting.
So this is this is what needed to be said. It's not just with tea. These processes happen with every organic matter.
Yeah.
Right.
So
That's
now,
what I
how
needed
do
to
you?
know.
And obviously at different rates and in different ways. But yes. And so now you have the situation. Yeah, amazing. We should really be talking about the tea.
Ooh,
Yeah, it's amazing.
it's good tea. Okay,
It's very good tea.
So
So now you're talking about now you've got those factors, and there
Right.
may be others, but let's say those are the main ones, right? Now you've got those factors. Let's talk about each one in turn, right? Oxidation. How do you increase the speed of oxidation? Well, you need to give it some air. Right? Not too much. There's enough oxygen around, right? Like even if you open a bag of tea and close it, you've kind of refreshed the oxygen, right?
that's the question, right? So how long? So how I decided to store my teas lately are in bags, like in the Maillard bags, in the wrappers. I store my case side by side. They're not touching each other. They're in their individual wrapper, and they're like in big plastic tubs that are like oxygen free. Every now and then, I go.
Well, they're not oxygen free because they do have some.
They have some oxygen
space.
to begin.
You haven't displaced or vacuum
every
sealed
few
it.
weeks, few months, maybe. I go in, I open, I leave it open for half an hour.
Yeah.
Would you say, it's not necessarily, you don't need to leave it for an hour, you just take it off, put it back in, oxygen has already come in? Or would I like the idea of they aerate a little bit?
I
This is
can't
my
give you the
thing.
exact answer to that because I can't see graphic imagery of how much air is leaving and how much air is being replaced.
Right.
But I would make the, I think, relatively safe assumption that opening it, leaving it for 10 minutes and closing it is probably
Right, so I don't
gonna
need to
be
wait
enough.
an hour. Okay,
I don't think so, but like I'm happy to be corrected.
right.
So oxygen is going to, so with oxidation, you want some oxygen. You don't want
Yeah.
to be in a vacuum.
Yeah.
Humidity is going to increase all reactions, because when you add moisture, right, you're allowing things to move. You're allowing reactions to take place, right? So humidity is also going to speed up oxidation. Basically, oxygen, humidity, temperature will speed up oxidation. Those are the main three, right? Oxygen, humidity, airflow, humidity, and temperature.
Right.
Those are your main like considerations
because
that you need to think of.
You can't force the Maillard reaction, right? You can't force caramelization.
No,
It just happens over time.
so
It
Maillard
happens
reaction,
anywhere.
for example, I know that it increases at I think low pH. So if it's slightly acidic conditions, but you're not going to change the acidic conditions of like
no
or
way.
maybe it might be the other way around. But I know that pH is involved in some degree, right? So of course, like there's going to be other factors that if you wanted to manipulate, you could potentially do, but you're probably going to have to change the tea leaves in that at that
Right.
point. The only things that you really have under your control are those three things, and very importantly, the surrounding aromatics, because you can wreck aging. I would say that's probably the biggest factor for wrecking aging, is not that you've kept it in too dry an environment or too wet an environment, although that will have an
It's the
effect.
surrounding
It's
aromatics.
the surrounding aromatics. It's whether or not it's being contaminated.
The thing is, I used to think that so basically I have my apartment back home, and the kitchen is far away from the room that I store my tea in. I store my tea in a wooden cupboard,
Yeah.
cupboard, and in Ishi clay. But even so they got dry. That's because there was too much oxygen, right? But the taste, the peppery taste, it must have been from the surrounding environment. So it must have been like my mom cooking next door.
Yeah.
Even though it doesn't feel like there's
Yeah.
the smell does come. It must have somehow. So it must have somehow.
Yeah, but
That's
how much
teas.
can you control, right? That's the thing.
So this is where I'm at now. I'm thinking like, okay, how much can I control? So I can't control, having it in the cupboard, having it in the house. So I decided basement. Luckily, I have basement. I have basement in the bottom of the building where I have like my own storage space. So then, but it's funky. It's an old. It's an old basement smell. It's an old. So I don't want those
Listen.
affecting my teas, right?
Yeah.
So this is where I came up with the idea of big plastic tubs that they're there. They're not affected by because they're in oxygen free. Apart from the oxygen I give them every now and then, they will stay away from smells and odors. And I give them oxygen once every few weeks, a week, 2 weeks, depends when I'm home, and also humidity. 65 Bovida packs.
So you put Bovida packs. For those of you who
Yes.
don't know, Bovida packs are like humidity control packs. So you put 65, did you say?
65 because I don't want to like push. So from what I know is like 65% is kind of like
Okay, just let's go backwards quickly, okay?
let's
So
go backwards.
because I want to just like make sure I do things in a little bit of a teacherly way, right? So
Right.
oxidation is increased, speeded up by temperature, having some oxygen obviously is necessary, and heat, right? Fermentation is exactly the same. It's sped up by humidity, by heat, but it's sped up by less oxygen. So you've got an interplay there, right?
right.
So that's one of the factors. Are you more fermenting or are you more oxidizing?
More fermenting.
One of the reasons why cake aged tea is different, produces a different aged tea compared to loose, is because of the amount of surface area in loose that's exposed to air. Right? With a cake, you've got an area which is compressed where it's not exposed to air. So you're having sort of a two-tone effect. You're having more oxidation happening on the outside, more fermentation happening on the inside, right? Because the inside's low oxygen, the outside is more exposed to the air. So that's one of the things that is always worth considering is your balance of oxidation versus fermentation, because they will be happening at the same time. Right. But if you provide oxygen, like I said, oxygen takes priority, right? It's an easier way to generate energy, and therefore, it's more likely that you're going to steer the tea more towards an oxidative process rather than a fermentation process, right? Maillard reaction, I do not know enough, but I would make the assumption, I think very safe assumption, that higher temperature is going to speed up the Maillard reaction, since it is temperature conscious, right? Like, Maillard reaction is usually at a high temperature, so cooler is going to be slower, right? So temperature is always, so across the board, you increase the temperature, you're going to increase the speed of aging, right? Which is why some people have temperature controlled storage, right? They'll put like these heating mats that they put under plants. Like, have you seen these?
Yeah.
And they'll put like their storage on there, so that there's a sort of like a warmth to the storage space. So heating will always increase. Humidity will always increase. Air is your only real factor here. That if you forget about the environment and you were just like taking a container, right? Air is your only real factor of like, you've got to make a decision there. Throw one more thing into the spanner, because we haven't talked about types of tea yet. But if you are going to be aging an oolong tea, right? Oolong teas being very prized for their aromatics. Yeah. I mean, oolong is one of the most aromatic teas, right? So if you're taking an oolong tea to age it, you want to keep it airtight, not simply because you're trying to increase the fermentation side of things, but because you want to keep those aromatics. You don't want the aromatics to dissipate. Whereas something like Pu-Erh tea, where the aromatics are like, of course, important, but their shifting and changing is kind of part of what you want, right? You don't want that so much in an aged oolong, right? You want the aromatics to stay, but that sour sort of sweet caramelization happening.
You want that to happen.
So the intention is very important, right? So my advice is, if I was going to sort of just make very blanket statements, is that black teas, oolong teas, and white teas I would store in lower oxygen, airtight. The reason for oolong teas, maintaining aromatics, right? And bringing about more of a fermentation. Same with black teas. Black teas are very aromatic when you think about it, right? And you want that aromatic preservation, and you want then the fermentation and Maillard reactions. I don't want so much oxidation of those teas, right? I want more of a fermentation. White teas, again, I really enjoy the fermented taste of a white tea.
Yeah.
Right?
Same.
I really enjoy that fruity, slightly alcoholic note, honeyed note of a white tea. So for me, I think ideally, and I don't because I don't have the space, right? But ideally, low oxygen environment, like and humidity, good humidity, and go for more fermentation. With Pu-Erh tea and with ripe Hei Chas, I think it's much easier. You're much more in, like, you can allow oxygen, you can allow airflow, because especially if it's cake aged, if it wasn't cake aged and it was loose, then I would say, okay, a bit different. You might want to control it because there's a lot of surface area that's exposed to the air. But in a cake aged Pu-Erh tea and in a cake aged Hei Cha, I think that you can allow for more airflow because the aromatic preservation is not really the point here. The aging is different, and that two-tone effect of oxidation and fermentation, I think, is a really nice thing for Pu-Erh. But you can experiment. Like, take the same cake, put one in an airtight, put one in in an oxygen with more airflow. But the problem is, how are you going to get that airtight one out without exposing it? So it's almost like you've got to put it into deep storage for a few years without touching it, and then going in to taste it. Anyway, so that's sort of would be my sort of broad strokes. But yeah, go ahead. We can talk about intricacies now.
Yeah, because that's the thing, right? So people, this is nice and all, hearing about the theory of it and how it works and everything, which is good. But the people are like, okay, but what am I gonna do? What am I doing? Am I storing it like this? Am I storing that? What am I doing? Because I bought I bought 3 cakes and I want to drink one and I want to save 2. How am I gonna save these 2s? And that's where I'm at. I'm like, okay, I'm the same way. I got a few that I'm drinking and I've drunk, and then I have a lot of them that I'm keeping for years and years to come.
Yeah.
And then when I went into the ones that I was saving, that was like about
They taste like bell pepper.
3, 4, 5 years, and I'm like, oh my god.
But do they still taste like bell pepper?
So I haven't tasted them since I tasted them like a year, 2 years ago, almost 2 years ago. I haven't tasted them, so I'm gonna experiment. I'm gonna experiment soon and see if they've changed. Because now I've put them from oxygen. They had a lot of oxygen, so now I put in oxygen free. So I sealed them. So I'm just like, okay, I've sealed them.
What do you mean oxygen free? What did you do?
So they were in clay, right? So now I just went and I took cellar kitchen roll and I sealed it. So there's no more oxygen going in those. I know this is the purpose, but no. They need to ferment a little bit more. They had a lot of oxygen, so they need to ferment. So and then I'm keeping them in the basement, right? So this is about like 15 to 20 degrees.
Yeah, it's a bit cool.
It's a bit cold, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a bit cold, but
temperature, humidity,
what would
oxygen.
You think
out of all of the 2 things, temperature is the easiest way to speed up. Let's assuming you want to speed up your aging process, so you want it to. You want it.
I don't think I do.
Okay, listen, but why wouldn't you?
Because I don't want to mess it up.
But that's not the same thing. Okay, so let's talk about messing up. Okay, you can mess up if you make it too humid, the environment. This tea is like blowing me away. You can mess it up if it's too humid because you can develop mold. Right. Now I will just quickly, as a side note on mold, because I do get asked this question, it's normal for there to be some mold on some teas. Right. I do not freak out about it, especially if it's white mold.
Take it off.
Usually if it's white mold, take a toothbrush, brush it off, done.
Yeah.
Or even just scrape it off. It's fine. I'm not but everyone has their own opinions on that, fine. But I've drunk enough teas and enough moldy teas to recognize that I don't have a problem, and sometimes I seek it out. So I don't I'm not saying you ruin teas, but it can certainly get to the point where you're a little bit like, whoa, okay, there's mold development here. You want to try to avoid that if you can, unless you're going for the nug potion style, mycelium activity.
Yeah.
Right. It's also important to note that the microbes in the fermentation is partly fungi, partly bacteria, so they'll have different preferred storage conditions. So you might be accelerating bacterial fermentation, or you might be accelerating fungal fermentation.
That's what I said at the beginning. I think aging tea is an art form, and it's not so. But my overall feeling on this is people get too stressed out. They do. Yeah, that's true.
There's a certain sense of letting go. Your environment is your environment, right? Your environment is you can only do so much. And at some point there's a beautiful thing about the tea reacting to your environment. So from maybe a little bit of a sort of overly philosophical point of view, it's don't stress too much.
Yeah.
Okay, about it. Pay attention to the basics. Obviously keep the tea away from strong smells. Now, if you are living in a small apartment and there's no way of escaping it, then that's going to then impact other things. So, okay, then like you say, I'm going to have to put it in a sealed box, right? And open it every now and again to try to stop that. If, however, you find that you've got a relatively good space that's not got too many odors, then, you can be a bit more relaxed. I would say another thing is in terms of odor preservation and aromatics is I generally do agree that keeping teas of the same type together is a good practice. So I wouldn't be storing, a huge amount of ripe Pu-Erh with my white teas, right?
Right.
I would try to separate them. But I'm not suggesting that they need to be completely separated or isolated. Just don't just mix them all up. Keep your white teas a little bit together. Keep your black, keep the types a little bit together, because there will be some cross talk that's happening between them.
Right, but people will say okay, but I can't mix I cannot mix white tea. So if white tea is good to store just in the plastic pouch, complete airtight, there's no way there's contamination. So
yeah, okay. So that's what brings me on to my next point, is that really the simplest way to do it is just keep every tea in its own pouch.
it's in all pouch tight,
right?
Yeah.
And with the teas that you want to have more fermentation, be a little bit more scrupulous about when you put the tea back. Squeeze out as much oxygen, displace as much air as possible, and seal it so that you've almost done some sort of like semi-vacuum sealing, right? Just really try to squeeze out. This is literally the only thing that I would recommend people to do, is focus on your air. Do you want to squeeze out the air, or do you want to just sort of refresh the air? And that's going to be the difference. And I, with Pu-Erh and right Pu-Erh versus the others. So for me, black tea, oolong tea, white teas, I'll squeeze out the air as much as possible. Pu-Erh teas, I'll sort of just open it and close it and be a bit more lackadaisical about the air, right? And that's it. You're keeping it essentially in its own environment. Then you've got the issue of humidity, of course, right?
Right.
Now, you get yourself those little hygrometers, right?
Right.
So those little humidity meters, right? And just put them around where your teas are, and look at what the humidity is. If it's below 55%, it's probably a bit too dry.
It's dry. Yeah.
If it's above 75%, you're probably in a bit like you've got to watch out for mold, right?
All right.
But if you're in that sort of 55 to 70% range, then you're good. Now, the question of whether or not the humidity that's on the shelf is the same as the humidity that's in the bag is one that I haven't done enough tests, and I should do that, because you can get these wireless hygrometers. You can put them in the bag, seal it, and then you can check the humidity on your phone. I've been meaning to do that.
Oh, really?
Right,
That's
because it might be
interesting.
different, and I suspect it will be different. And I suspect, although I don't know, I suspect that probably the humidity in the bags is slightly higher than just on the shelf, because in the shelf you've got more airflow. However, it might not be the case, because it might be that it's just being replenished with humid air. So I would need to look into that, and that might be something to consider. But essentially, seal your cakes in little bags, the bags that they come with usually from the vendor. Choose how much oxygen you put out, measure your humidity, and try to get the temperature to be relatively warm.
What is relatively warm? Like is
25, 20 to 25.
20, 25. All right.
Like a good warm room temperature.
I put my... That's the thing. If they're kept in the house, the temperature might go higher.
And
in
that's
summer.
okay. That's
Can go
okay.
to 30.
Again, I wouldn't worry about that, because it'll all even out over time, right?
Oh, you're thinking like higher temperature here, lower temperature
Yeah,
here, and
it's
kind
gonna.
of
It's
evens
like
out.
Okay. You're gonna have these like moments that you're having more or less aging, right?
I'm actually curious what happened to my teas now, because like how I got scared. I said they're dry, they're too dry, and that's why I sealed them. I was just like seal them, put them in like colder conditions, like in 20 degrees. The humidity down there is high, but if they're sealed, that's another thing, right? So if the humidity of the place is 70 degrees, but they're sealed in
Well, that's what
plastic,
I mean.
it doesn't affect it, does it?
Well, that's what I mean. I would need to. I haven't done the test. I would need to get the wireless meters and
Right.
put them in the bags, and then wait and then measure over a day. I'm sure it's been done. There might be some comments there. I'm sure it's been done. Listen, but again, like I just want to stress the point. Like you can only do what you can do, and like the tea is good tea, right? And it will, like I've tasted teas that are aging, and sometimes I taste it and I go, ugh, no, leave it.
Accept the card.
Leave
you've
it,
been
and then
given.
like a year later you drink it and you go, wow, that's amazing. It's going to shift. It's going to go through its own little periods, and that's kind of what's cool about it, right? The other thing to note is like you hear about the different storage conditions, like Hong Kong storage, Taiwan storage, and stuff. Like, yeah, that is important, especially if you're buying an aged cake, right? You want to know how it was stored, right? The most powerful thing about those storage places is that they have their own ecosystem of microbes.
Oh,
right?
really?
It's not that they've nailed the temperature and the humidity. Like, you know, of course there's wet storage, there's dry storage, but ultimately it's like you go into these Pu-Erh factories, or not factories, the Pu-Erh storage spaces. They're not keeping their teas well. Like, as in, like, it's not like everything is like perfectly sealed, and no, they're just like on shelves everywhere.
Right.
But the whole room is just breathing with these microbes that have been, you know, like this culture, literally a culture of microbes that have been there for decades and decades and decades.
Right.
Poor, you know, microbe culture that you put any tea in there, it's going to shift, it's going to move, right?
And are those cultures there because of like always
Just
the moving
replenishing, just tea.
Because that's what they did. They just put tea,
just
and then
piles and
automatically
piles of
like
tea.
There's this.
Yeah, and all these
microbiome,
spores and all this stuff. It's like an ecosystem,
It
right?
goes in the walls. It goes.
And so it's like really your ultimate goal is create a space, make your own little weird ecosystem. You know, like, you know,
yeah. Oh, that's
I can't. I obviously there are going to be people with different opinions, and some people will go, no, you've got to be more exacting. I just think that life's too short to start getting too hung up about these kinds of things. But yes, it's good to know the basics. It's good to know, like, you know, it's good to understand what you're trying to do. And I think that the advice that I gave regarding the different tea types, I would stand by for as sort of your initial approach. So oolongs, blacks, white teas, bit oxygen free or as airtight as possible, and the others not. And then just try to have a decent enough temperature and a decent enough humidity and keep it away from aromas. And after you've done that, everything else is like, well, you're gonna have to just see what happens. Right. You know.
One last question. Tell us a bit about, like you said, we hear about wet condition storing, wet storing and dry storing. Like, oh, this has been like wet stored, and then you see it in the taste of the tea. It's like, whoa, it has like a funky. So how do they look? Because I don't know, right?
It's just the humidity in the air.
Is it just because of this is stored in Hong Kong? This is
humid environment.
Hot, humid environment. So there's no like they're not doing anything specific. Just the area is.
Well, you've got to remember
they're not controlling anything.
Yeah. What you've got to remember is the aging of tea is not a traditional practice.
Is it something that just happened over time and they go like, oh,
it's
actually
literally
this is
about
nice.
like 20, 30 years old. Like this idea of okay, I don't want to like, I'm sure I'm going to get a comment. Actually, was it? But like, it's relatively modern.
Right.
The idea of aging teas is not something that is old.
How did it came about?
It came about because people have been storing tea, right? Because they've got tea, so they're storing it, and they're noticing that it's changing, right? So it's not like they're going, oh my god, what's happened? This is aging for the first time. No, they've noticed that it's changing and they've tasted it. But the idea of like, I'm going to buy this tea in order to now age it and change it is not something that is old or traditional. And so what's happening therefore is you've got just like these storage rooms, and some of them are in humid environments and some of them are in dry environments. And over time, people have worked out that, the same tea stored in different places tastes different 10 years later. And so they're starting to name it. That's more wet storage, that's more dry storage. It's not like there's a factory going, this is our wet storage. You know what I mean? It is literally just, that's the environment. And that's what I mean. Like, your environment is your environment. Like, store your tea, see what happens. You might find that you get bell pepper environment. I don't know.
I did.
I did. Like, maybe people go, oh my gosh, when tea stored in Romania has this unique, sharp, peppery note to it. And people, like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, it's always this thing. It's like this, there's this concept that there was this grand plan that's been going on for like millennia of like refining how to age. It's not like that. It's very open. It's very free. It's very easy. And yes, people are refining it and people are trying to work out how to, and that's great. They're creating their Pomodors and they're doing all this stuff, and the geeks will always be the geeks, of which I'm one of them, right? But you've also got to let go a bit. I mean, you see how I store my teas.
Yeah, that's true. And they're amazing. Like, look at that.
I mean, it's
beautiful.
like my teas are literally in a cupboard.
Pu-Erh tea.
They're not covered. There's no tong. There's no like bags, right? Now, I'm not saying that to boast. I'm just saying that because I've got too many teas. It would be impossible for me to start to do that, right?
Yeah.
Probably if I had less teas, I would. But, you know, it's just exposed to the world, you know? They're not doing too shabby.
Yeah, they're not doing too shabby. I mean, like, this is great. Literally, you just have it in the Zisha and on the shelves.
Yeah.
And if I would say one thing is like, there's one thing that I don't know yet. And I think like you can answer this question, but, you know, I'm not going to believe you because I need to see it with my own eyes. So I know that Pu-Erh tea, like you said, comes from Yunnan, right?
Yeah.
We always hear it, like he always says, you know, Pu-Erh tea comes from Yunnan. Yunnan is in South of China. He's been there. His show us has been there. I've never been there. I have no idea. I have to trust you on your words.
It's just like flat
I have
Earth
to trust.
theory.
Yeah, I have to trust that. Okay, there's this magical place in China called Yunnan that has this amazing tea. That
There's a bit of
been
consensus
there.
about it, though.
I just feel like I've never been there. So, I mean,
What is it? Are you genuinely doubting that there's a place called Yunnan?
I just feel like
I
to
know
prove
what
me.
you're doing. I know what you're doing. You're fishing for a China.
I just feel like to prove me wrong, to show me that this place
been doing
actually
this for years.
exists. I need to like come with you there and see the actual forest and see the things. And people out there have been asking for a long time, says, take Adrian to China. Take Adrian to China. Take to this mystical place where tea exists. And yeah, I think like the more thumbs in the air, the more chances I'll get.
He's taking this opportunity to somehow
China.
pressure me, but on camera.
I am, and I've been doing this for the last few years, and
Hasn't
I'm
quite
still
worked.
doing it. Who knows?
But you raised one point that we haven't quickly to touch upon. One point about the aging as I sidestep that little jibe to bring you to China, is that, you know, the types of tea and why they're suitable for aging. So all teas age,
Right.
All teas will
But
age.
what are more suitable?
The ones that are more suitable for aging, again, like we said in the last video, it depends on your tastes, right? So you can choose to like green teas that's old if you want, that's fine. But, you know, preservation of microbial action is a key part of the fermentation. Every tea will oxidize, but if you want to bring about fermentation, then there needs to be some level of preservation of microbes. Now, what does that mean? That's a long discussion, and I don't know if I've got all the answers to it. But, you know, it definitely means that you've got to treat the tea in a less conveyor belt, less industrialized approach. More sun drying, less, you know, industrial heating. The shaching process needs to be maybe considered a little bit, although I'm amazed at how hot they fry the leaves.
I was curious.
You know, because I always, you know, many years ago thought that they pan fry at a relatively low temperature to maintain enzymatic activity, but they're hot, right?
Oh, I put my hand in one of those
I
hot
know, here he goes
pans.
again. Anyway, I'm just saying that's maybe the subject of another discussion. Is like what are the sort of processes that bring about that make teas more conducive to aging. But I hope at least that you have a little bit of a clearer idea in terms of tea aging. I recognize that it's we probably went through it in a little bit of a convoluted way. If you feel you need like a straight up factual ABC video, then, you know, hit me in the comments section below and I'll try to do one of those for you. Any other questions apart from bring me to China?
Harassing David to China.
Harassing me.
No, that was it, I think.
right.
I'm happy with that.
Cool. Anyway, again, we'll think about other ones to do in terms of these sort of training sessions. But hopefully you find them useful. That's it, tea heads. Check out our other videos, taste our teas wherever you're on the world by browsing mayleaf.com and come visit us if you're ever in London. Other than that, this is Adrian and I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being part of Revelation Tea. Stay away from the tea bags, keep drinking the good stuff and spread the word because nobody deserves bad tea. Now we're going to drink more of this.
Yeah.